All right, guys, here we are. We're back. Life in the Peloton is back. I'm Mitch Docker, your host, and we're being proudly supported by MAP. Winter is definitely here in the Southern Hemisphere. Melbourne is bitterly cold at the moment, but MAP have their 5-step guide to kitting up in the cold conditions. Step 1, it's all about the base. You've got to start with the right base layer when it comes to winter apparel. Step 2, tights are not for superheroes. You got to get the full-length bib tights. I mean, don't muck around with leg warmers and nicks. Do the full things. You know what you're doing when you got the full big puppies on. Step 3, layering up, getting it right on top. It's a personal choice. Get the big jacket on or layer up from jersey right up to jacket. Hands up. Step 4, gloves are an essential element when the winter wardrobe comes about. They're the things that are cutting through the wind first, so get your gloves right. And step 5, accessorize and acclimatize. Add, adapt, and bring your own style. Neck warmers, headbands, skull cap, whatever it is, the MAP have everything you need to get through your next cold winter ride. Head over to map.cc. Well, yep, I've been back in the lab testing. Yeah, that's right. Why? Why the hell am I doing that? Well, if you've been listening to Life in the Peloton for the last few years, you would know I've been lucky enough to speak to Dr. Andre Gerche on a couple of occasions on the podcast. Andre is one of the most highly regarded sports cardiologists in the world. He heads up the Heart and Exercise Research Trial Labs supported by the Victor Chang Cardiac Research Institute and the St. Vincent's Institute of Medical Research here in Melbourne, as well as conducting the same research over at the University Hospital in Leuven in Belgium. Now, I've also worked with Andre for many years since I turned professional back in 2009, and he's conducted multiple cardiovascular exercise tests throughout my career. Part of being a professional cyclist is that the UCI requires every pro each year to perform some medical examinations and screenings in the off-season between the 1st of December and the 31st of January before the racing season kicks off. And I quote, with an aim to reduce as far as possible the risk of sudden cardiac death during sporting activity. Look, I unpacked this in a full episode I did with Andre back in February 2022. Go back and have a listen to that because it's about understanding what this testing protocol is all about and then looking into the heart of pro cyclists. Plus, he gives me a little bit of advice on what I might need to do as I was freshly retiring from competitive racing. Fast forward a year and Andre had me back in the lab as a part of the prospective heart study where Andre and his team are investigating the effects of endurance exercise on the heart, looking at the long-term health effects on high-level exercise. It's across a lot of endurance sports with high-level athletes, runners, rowers, swimmers, and of course, cyclists just like me. That year, I took the mic along with me and we ran through all the tests, understanding what they're doing in there and what's going on with my heart after a year of stepping out of the pro peloton. It was so interesting. Of course, it's my body, so I was really interested. And I'm so privileged to be able to have this testing done. But it's the way that Andre and his team are able to explain the results that I find so fascinating. I highly recommend, if you haven't heard that ep, or if you have, go back again and have a listen, refresh yourself. That was released in January 2023, time for testing. Look, we're going to have all these links in the show notes for you guys. And well, because it's been 2 years, I've been summoned for my next load of testing, a part of that study. But this time, it's not just about me. I wanted to use my tests and my results as an example to help understand what is under the hood of these superhuman athletes in the World Tour Peloton these days. The Peloton has changed so much. I've only been out of it for just over 3 years, and I'm sure you can agree with me, the racing is just insane now. But why are these guys going so fast? That's the question we keep asking. I thought, let's get under the hood and have a look with Andre. Now, I've been speaking about these guys who are just about lining up for the Tour de France because it's upon us. And maybe you're heading across this year, or if you're listening to this and you're already over there, well, don't go paying those ridiculous roaming fees when you're abroad, at the tour, or when you're just traveling overseas this year. Improve your connection whilst you're on the move and protect your privacy whilst you're browsing as well. There is a way to do this, and it's with this week's show sponsor, Saily. From the same guys who brought you NordVPN, Saily is an eSIM service app with plans in over 190 countries that gives you an affordable coverage without having to go and find some local SIM wherever you're traveling. Or even worse, paying some outrageous daily roaming fee with your existing mobile network. Over the last few years, I've been traveling back and forth to Europe for the Tour de France and other things, and I often get hit with some very expensive and quite data restricting roaming plans with my Australian phone network. I wish I had known about Saily sooner. It's very easy. Download the Saily app on your device, purchase a plan that offers the coverage in the country you're traveling, install the eSIM, and that's it. You're up and away. Saily only needs to be installed once, so as a user, you don't have to install a new eSIM for each country as you're traveling along. As I said before, you can eliminate those roaming fees, and just like NordVPN, you can change your virtual location, block miscellaneous ads, and stay safer with web protection. It's an all-in-one package. Best of all, Saily offers 24/7 support wherever you are, whatever your issue is, they're there to help. If you want to check out Saily on your next trip, just download the Saily app, use the code PELOSURF to get 15% off your next data plan, or head over to www.saily.com/PeloSurf. That's PELOSURF, and get your discount for just being a Life in the Peloton listener. Great to be able to share this with you guys. Make sure you check out the link in the show notes and jump on board. Lastly, guys, have you signed up? The Dirty Docker is coming. We're back. Bigger and better than ever, of course. Second time round, the Dirty Docker is getting all geared up for this October up in the infamous Land Vegas, my hometown, Lancefield, here in Victoria, Australia. If you were there last year for the first edition, you will know it was an all-in sporting festival. Well, we're back with the same vibes. We have cyclocross, we've got cross-country running, we even have a beer mile this year, a bush beer mile of all. After all the activities are done, Saturday night we have the band, the Bloody Noras, coming in to play live and get the party started. Pitch a tent, grab a cold beer and enjoy the atmosphere. That's what it's all about. And then, of course, on Sunday, we gear up for gravel, the Co-Borsum gravel loop. 4 different lengths. Select your suffering. It's going to be a hoot. I can't wait. Love to see you there. And there's going to definitely be a prize for the person who has traveled the furthest to be there right on the start line. Righto, guys. Here we go. We're in the lab with Andre. Well, I'm back again. Here we go, the testing again. And Caitlin, you've just checked me in. Tell me, this is day 1 of 2. What are we doing?
Today we'll be doing an updated questionnaire and medical history. We'll also be doing an ECG, echocardiogram, and CPET or VO2 max testing.
We've just got back from the ECG. What's the purpose and what are you looking for?
With an ECG, we're just looking for how your heart's functioning electrically.
Seeing everyone coming in, how many people are in the study?
Overall, across a few different cohorts, from memory, adding them all together, about 500-ish. So quite a few across sort of young athletes, older athletes, retiring athletes and rowers.
Interesting seeing the broad spectrum of the different athletes coming in, young, old, all different sports for yourself.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how they'll perform differently on the VO2 test as well, and I guess how much they enjoy it. A cyclist is going to have a bit more fun than a runner on a bike.
The psychology of it, I guess, is do you cheer them on or you just let them do their thing?
When it gets a bit harder and we can see on the test that the values are sort of starting to level out and we're reaching max, we will sort of be a bit more positive and try to, we call it like a cheerleading squad, to try to cheer you on.
All right, I'm off to the echo now. What are they looking for in the echo now, and what's the process like?
I guess if the ECG is looking at sort of the electrical component of your heart, the echo is looking at the plumbing for sort of, so it's looking at the structure of your heart. So you'll be able to see sort of the different chambers and the atria as well as the valves and just get a good look at all the vessels around it.
And just in general, and you may not know the answer to this question, but is there any expectation of what you should see over the time with the athletes? Is there anything that they're looking for triggers, or I don't actually know. Is it looking for things that may be malfunctioning?
It's just with the study, it's mainly looking at how people respond differently to intense endurance exercise over a period of time. So why some people might get a negative adaptation such as atrial fibrillation and others will be fine even if they do sort of similar things.
All right, well, let's a bit of testing to go. How long is it expected to be?
Ure's fairly fast, so it'll be anywhere from half an hour to an hour. And then the CPET or sort of VO2 max test setting up will take longer than actually doing it. Doing it will be maybe 10-ish minutes, but then setting up and everything, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes.
Let's go check it out. Well, Andre, he's arrived just in time to watch the best bit. We've just finished the VO2 max test. You love watching that, don't you? I can just see you on the side there, Andre.
Good watching a bit of pain.
Tell me, first of all, what's the protocol? Why are we doing this?
So it's just a ramp test. So basically it starts off easy and just gets harder and harder, a couple of watts every second. Until you can't push anymore. As you probably experienced in the last minute, it all feels like a sort of gorilla jumped on your back and it suddenly gets extremely difficult.
Give us some numbers so people know. We're on there for how long, time-wise, and the watts. We started at 0 watts and it ramped up to, from what I saw, 450, I could be wrong.
Yeah, so you're on there for 16 minutes, but of that 16 minutes, a couple was just getting resting data. So all up, you're exercising for about 13 minutes, and your maximum was almost exactly 450 watts, I think. But it was 451, which makes me think that out of the corner of your eye, because you were glinting at the wattage, that you set a little mental goal of getting to 450.
Well, I think if I hadn't have said that, I was pretty done at about 410.
So if you look at your oxygen consumption here, you can see that you've gone up, hit a plateau, and for the last 20 seconds of exercise, it was actually going down. So we'd be very confident that we got to your physiological maximum.
And that's what we're looking for, isn't it? I'm not going to try and explain it. What are you looking for?
So basically, the when you exercise, it's all about how much oxygen the body can use, or at least in endurance exercise. If you're doing sprints or something, then it's other energy systems. But for sports like cycling, your performance is pretty well correlated with how well your body can use oxygen. And then also other things like efficiency, especially if you're doing running and things, because if you're running, it's how fast you can run at a given amount of energy. But in cycling, they're the two determinants, how much oxygen, how fit you can be, and then how fast you can pedal for any level of fitness. And some of that latter comes down to aerodynamics and all of these sort of factors. But one of the really key measures of a cyclist is how good the engine is and how good the muscles are at using oxygen, and both of those factors are measured in a VO2 max.
All right, I'm back on Wednesday. What are we doing on Wednesday?
So Wednesday we've got an MRI scan, so we measure all your heart function and the size of your heart, which will be interesting because our theory would be, having lost, but having with your oxygen consumption being down by about 10%, we might see that your heart volumes are down by a little bit as well, which is not a problem, but that's just, the harder you train, the bigger the engine, and given that everything's come down a little bit, we might find that the volumes are down slightly. And so we measure all of the heart size, volumes, and then also see how the heart reacts to exercise with that, as you can probably remember, cycling flat out in the MRI machine.
I can't wait. Well, I'm going to cool down. I've got my session in for today, and I'll see you in a couple of days.
I'm Crystal Janssens, and I'm a research nurse working at St Vincent's Institute for Medical Research, and we're currently at St Vincent's Hospital in Fitzroy.
Well, it was a couple of years ago, but we weren't here. We were up at the Alfred, weren't we, a couple of years ago when we did this, Crystal. We're back in again. This is the second day. What have I been up to today? We just finished up, actually. So what did I get up to this morning?
Well, Mitch, we asked you to come in fasted this morning because we did a fasting blood test. It was a normal blood test, but we also looked at some cardiac markers. One of them is troponin. It's a protein that gets released when there's muscle in the heart. So we kind of looked at anything cardiac related, and then you underwent the cardiac MRI, the special one, because we asked you to pedal again while lying flat in the MRI, and we ended up with doing a DEXA scan to look at body composition and bone health.
The MRI was quite long. It was, what was it, about 45 minutes? Is that normal for an MRI scan? It felt like quite a lengthy one. I know we also did the exercise in it, which is something completely foreign. That doesn't happen at all normally, does it?
No, that is very special and only done in a couple of centres throughout the world. So it is a bit longer than a normal cardiac scan. It was a very thorough one where we also we injected some gadolinium to look at any heart damage, like muscle damage. But the exercise part is very unique to our research and to what Andre does.
And the DEXA scan, that's just looking at the bone densities. Any sort of predictions you can imagine, from 2 years on, I'm 38 years old now, ex-pro cyclist, things that would you expect a big drop off, or now I'm into running, would you expect that things have stayed level? What do you sort of expect with, when you see these scans year after year?
I wouldn't expect... first of all, bone health is not my specialty, but I wouldn't expect to see a lot of change in you. Obviously, your cycling wasn't really a weight-bearing sport. Now you're kind of running a little bit more. So I would have thought, even though you're a bit older, that your bone health would remain the same. The
DEXA scan does the most interesting thing at all. How fat you are. Tell me, the results are in. Let's have a look here. What have we got?
So in terms of body percentage fat, you're doing really well, 12.5%. So compared to a population, like out of 100 people, only 5 would have a lower fat percentage than you, Mitch.
Fantastic. That's good to see. It's very, very accurate, isn't it? This is the most accurate way to measure body composition.
Correct. And in terms of, we're very interested in visceral fat. That's the fat that's just on top of your organs. And again, you're scoring extremely well there with about 300 grams of visceral fat. That's excellent.
Fantastic. Well, you can try this one out and still listen to me too. Or maybe you're already doing that, because I'm sure you would have seen them on another cyclist in your local bunchy, or if you've been out running, because these things are going crazy, and for good reason too. I'm talking about Shocks. Shocks are the world's leading open ear headphones pioneer. Want the most comfortable and safest headphones for cycling? Well, here you go. What makes Shocks headphones so different? They are bone conduction headphones. The way they work is that the headphone rests just in front of your ears on your cheekbone, which allows your ear to remain open so you can hear both ambient sounds like traffic and people around you whilst you're still listening to music. Why do you need this? Well, it helps you keep that awareness of your surroundings while you're out exercising for that much more safer experience. So when you're out cycling in traffic, or even if you're up early on some country road, to be able to hear that car or that truck approaching from behind, giving you that moment to make sure you're as far over as you can be as they pass by. But also that little bit of awareness of people around you when you're out running or riding on small tracks and paths, that if someone is coming up behind you, you're not going to block up the whole track, so you can let them scoot on past. It's been really great for me personally, because I've been up in the Cobor Forest completely alone, but still in touch with my surroundings for a much greater connection when I'm out exercising. You have to try them out to sort of understand. The sound vibrates through your cheekbones, bypassing your eardrums. Now, the Open Pro 2s are out, new and improved, great sound quality, new EQ mode, so you can change them depending on what you're listening to, updated microphone in a new low wind position, so making phone calls while you're out running and exercising possible. Like I said before, if you want the most comfortable and safest headphones for cycling, running, or whatever you're doing, because I'm using them right now as I sit here and record with you guys, then get on board shokz.com.au, shokz.com.au, and make sure you chuck in the code LITP for a special listeners only discount. That's LITP. Well, Andre, the results are in. Here we go. We're back again. And thank you very much for having me in today to discuss my results. I think it's really special to be able to do this testing on myself, to have this data, to really just unpack what's going on inside me, because not everyone really gets to do this. And that's why I want to do this pod, to try and share some of that knowledge with everyone. So great to have you back on the pod, Andre.
Pleasure to have you, Mitch. I mean, it's always the opposite is true as well. We've got the sort of opportunity and pleasure of working with people like yourself that have, been in the endurance world at the highest level for many years. So it's an insight for us as well.
Well, just to give everyone a bit of context, and I did this last time. So last time I did the testing, I said that, look, I'd come more or less off 20 hours of training a week. That's an average because we've got a bit of an off season and things like that. 35,000K. That was in 2021, my last season as pro. Last time we checked in was 2022, a year after, and I'd done about 9 hours a week of training, 11,000K for the year. It's about a sort of 50 to 60% drop off. I've looked at it again. I'm down to about 6 hours of training a week or exercise a week, 7,000K. So again, another sort of 30% drop off from there. From when I was racing, about a 70 to 80% drop off from now back to 2021. Let's look at the results and see what's been happening inside. Is those drop-offs the same? Can they correlate? I'd be interested to hear.
So it's pretty interesting. I mean, firstly, it says two things. One, the enormous amount of training that was required as a pro athlete, and I think that people don't really realise just how much is, every day is a work day, which involves getting in the saddle. Whereas now I'd say even at 6-7 hours a week, it's still considerably more than the average person. So you've gone from being kind of a super athlete through to an athlete. But as a result, it's interesting because your VO2 max, your athletic conditioning has reduced, quite a bit. And I think that speaks to a few things. I think it speaks to the training that you just mentioned, both in terms of the volume, but probably also the quality. It's no longer going out and having a structured training which has all the multifacets of hard, less hard, lots of, but then also, to be honest, age, because we know from sort of mid-20s that your VO2 drops, mid-20s to sort of late 20s, your VO2 drops by about 1 mil per minute per kilogram, or about 1%, if you like. Often that doesn't correlate. People will say, hang on, the best cyclists are often in their late 20s, early 30s. There's also a degree of kind of know-how, efficiency, skill of the craft that compensate for the physiological slight drop-off that occurs. So your peak performance isn't necessarily your peak biological physiology.
Yeah, well, for instance, if we were sitting on, just say the Tour de France was done on a Zwift, and it was just purely down to data and who could just push out the best watts, maybe that would come into a factor.
Yeah, I think it would. I suspect if you did that, you might have a slightly younger sort of cohort that are doing better on pure physiology. Whereas, that sort of, kind of cliche of 10,000 hours, there's some real truth to that. It's even though in cycling, like running, for example, or swimming, there's a lot to be learnt through technique and gait. Probably slightly less so for cycling, but even still, there's, you'd know very well. There's efficient and less efficient sort of pedaling, and that all comes into it.
100%. There's definitely efficiency comes into it, and knowing how to use your energy strategically throughout the race, and I can even speak to. I use myself as a case example here, not being the best junior, but still being able to make it pro, because I learned how to use the Peloton to my advantage. If I was really talented as a young guy, maybe I wouldn't have learned the ins and outs of a bunch, how to use the bunch to my advantage, because I was strong enough to ride around the outside and win a race.
Yep.
That's not to say talented guys like that couldn't make it, but I think I used Durbo as an example. Durbo was that guy as a junior, and he sort of almost had to learn it when he went pro, and I sort of learned that before I was professional.
And you sort of see some of the young guys, really crash. Like they'll have those races where they're miles in front and then just hit a wall at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Whereas, again, it's a learned experience to pick up on all those micro signals. It seems that, hang on, I'm getting close to the wind, I'll pull back 2%, and all of those things are learning the craft. So I think pure physiology might favour the mid-20-year-old, whereas craftsmanship, mindfulness, all of those things sort of can sometimes take a little bit longer.
So what have we seen? From what you can see from the results, give us an overall perspective of where I'm sitting and in general what you see now with all the athletes you've got coming through.
Yeah, so from my perspective, one of the most interesting things is that your VO2 max has come off about sort of 15%. It's still, you're still super fit, but you no longer would fit into sort of the Tour de France kind of uber fitness sort of category.
You're saying I can't ride the Tour?
This year not. But the really interesting thing is that in coming down in fitness, we're very interested in the association between heart size and fitness. And across big populations, there's a really strong relationship. The fitter you are, the bigger your heart. It's one of the main determinants of fitness. And as you've become less fit, your heart's become a little bit smaller. So when we measured in 2022 your LV volumes, your left ventricular maximal full volume was just over 260 mils, and now it's just over 240 mils. The other interesting thing is that that's less than 10%, whereas your fitness has come off about 15%. So how does that work? We see that pretty typically, and we think that's due to a few things, because firstly, VO2 max, or your fitness, is partly determined by your heart and how much oxygen can be pumped to the muscles. But it's also about how well your muscles work. And so the 15% is probably a combination of both a reduction in heart capacity and also a little bit of a reduction in muscle capacity. And if you were to return to the training that you were doing in the past, I think your VO2 would improve. It would be hard to get it back up to the same level because of the kind of constraints of age. And the other interesting thing is if we get 23-year-olds through and we look at their heart in season and out of season, their heart is very plastic. It gets a lot bigger and then a lot, quite a bit smaller through in and out of workloads. As we get older, it really seems to us that plasticity goes away, so that if a middle-aged athlete breaks their leg and stops training for a few months, their heart gets smaller, but not that much. It's almost like, I often liken it to flexibility of the muscles. As you get older, it's harder to go to a yoga studio and put your feet behind your head. It might have been trainable when you were young. It becomes less and less so. And it seems that the heart is a bit the same. Once it gets large, it tends to stay large. And if we look at people who are Olympic, for example, we did a study recently looking at ex-Olympic rowers, and some of them had retired decades earlier, and their heart was still a little bit bigger than kind of would be expected for their level of fitness. So there's a degree to which the thumbprint of fitness stays, which I think is a good thing. You can sort of bank some, it's kind of like I would call fitness superannuation, like put a bit away. It's not to say that you shouldn't stay fit, but if you do become less fit, you can kind of return to it easier than someone who hasn't been fit in the past.
So looking at those younger athletes, just say a young kid, he trains, let's use cycling for example, he trains up, he makes it pro, but for whatever reason, we've seen it after his neo-pro year, he falls out of the Peloton. So at age, let's say 22, still at a very good level, and obviously spent maybe up to 8 to 10 years getting to that level, so an enlarged heart, obviously. Would that heart then, because he's only 22, and for instance me, I retired at 35, spending whatever, over 10 years in the Peloton, I would have that sort of a larger heart for a longer period?
Yeah, I don't know that for sure, but that's what I think I see. So the people who really retire when they're younger, it tends to return more to normal than the older athletes. And we've got some data as well from Italy, same sort of thing. When people had been Olympians for multiple years and then they detrain, the heart gets smaller but still stays big. Whereas, when really younger, I think that's less so.
Let's talk about what's going on in the peloton at the moment, in reference to some stuff that you found out with me, but in general of all your studies of many athletes. Give a bit of perspective for people. How many people in the world are doing the kind of study that you're doing this specific with endurance athletes? Firstly,
yeah. So our study, if I speak to our study, we've got now just under 500 elite athletes who were recruited, mostly age 16 to. Well, we've got a few different arms, but if we speak to just the age 16 to 24, we've got nearly 500 endurance athletes that we're following, and a number of those are cyclists across Australia and Belgium. And in fact, without giving names, because I can't in the study, but we've got amongst that a Grand Tour winner, a world champion, and some of the greatest European and Australian cyclists are in our study. So, we really can speak to the range of fitness and heart size that we see right up to, the very best cyclists in the world.
And at the time, this is what I want to get into, because at the time you are doing some current day testing with World Tour teams.
Yep.
So you get to see live stuff of not just retired riders and up and comers, ones who are there racing at the moment. Can you give me a bit of an insight? Because this is a bit of a hypothetical, an idea of mine, is that I sort of feel like there's definitely been a shift in the peloton. I felt it at the end of my time there in 2021. Speaking to a lot of athletes, we've seen it with the racing. We're watching the pelotons going faster, aerodynamics, nutrition, but also the athletes that are coming in. Can you speak to anything that you're seeing? And sort of, I'm calling this under the hood. Let's lift the hood of the engines. Let's talk about these athletes that are in the peloton, the Pogacars, the Jonas Vingegaards at the top of the Tour de France. These guys, is it a physiology thing? Are the hearts now? Are you seeing different physiology, or is it just a general across the board that the athletes entering the peloton are all at a higher level?
It's interesting because just from a sort of lay observer, I've seen the same thing. I mean, the quality and the way that they're racing these days is just out of the box. Like the sort of attacks, the quality of those attacks, the type of rider that wins across different kind of the day races and the tours and sort of mixing it up in the sprints and the climbs. It is phenomenal. It kind of does speak to this new sort of cyclist. I can't completely put my finger on what that is. What I can say is that some of those cyclists, from a cardiovascular point of view, have unbelievable hearts. Like that really, that combination of having a very big heart. And to give you an idea, some of the current best cyclists we have got left ventricular, those volumes I spoke to before, left ventricular end diastolic volume of nearly 400 mils. So, another quarter bigger than your heart again. They're just enormous. And what, from a cardiologist point of view, the thing that's absolutely fascinating about that is that when they're going at, 190, 200 beats per minute, the ability to fill and empty that heart at those sort of time frames, it's like a Dyson vacuum cleaner. It's just amazing, the pump function. Absolutely amazing. So why is it that we're sort of seeing these kind of the best trained and adapted athletes that we've ever seen? I don't know. I don't know what that X factor is. The other thing that's been really interesting is I've always said in the past that, we can look at heart size and we can pick the athlete from the non-athlete and whatever, but we can't pick the super athlete from the just okay. We've now got some data that's starting to question that. And if we divide athletes up into those who have won, pro tour races versus, if we put them into three buckets of good pros, really good pros and unbelievable pros, we actually...
Just on results, you mean?
On results.
Yep.
World Tour ranking points. And we can see bigger hearts, medium hearts. And so...
There's a direct correlation.
Yeah. And it's not...
So why I had never had any wins up there. Great. I'm glad that we got to the bottom of that. Yeah, perfect.
But it's not absolutely perfect. Like but we certainly, as groups, we can pick those out. So we can say, right, this person we would expect to be in the very sort of upper echelons of the sport, which has been a bit of a surprise to me.
It's really the trend of where the Peloton's going. Look, we've seen it definitely, and I was certainly one to complain about it. These guys who are able to show their data, which is a great thing, uncovering a lot of future champions, and whether it's through Zwift or whether it's through Strava files, they're able to show, hey, look, I'm out here. I don't have to win a race. I've got the engine of Tadej Pogacar. I used to say Chris Froome, but that's old talk now. But of Chris Froome, I can do these watts per kilo uphill. Teams were taking a chance on these riders. Cool. He may not have the racecraft yet. He's got the engine of a potential Tour de France winner. Let's get him in the Peloton and let's see how he goes. Let's just take a chance on him. He's got the engine. Let's see if the rest can happen. This is my theory of, and this is another conversation not for today, that why we are seeing a lot of different crashes in the Peloton, because there's a lot of unexperienced, very talented riders coming into the top level. Taking it to the next step, is this potentially the future of uncovering the next athlete? It's not just purely on watts per kilo. It's actually, let's look at the cardiology. Let's look at, what's going on inside. If they don't have a heart of a certain size, seriously, let's not even waste our time with that guy.
I think it could. I mean, it's interesting. Garmin years ago used to do this a bit with VO2s, and they said, I know of one of the pro riders I was speaking to, and he went and tried out, and they said, come back when your VO2 is over 75. That's our entry point, and then we'll work it out from there. And to
how many years ago do you reckon this was?
That was about 15 years ago.
Okay.
And then there was sort of, one of the really interesting things is that 15 years ago we had VO2 and then, not so many, the sort of power meters and everything were just sort of coming in at that stage. Whereas now we have so many touch points. You've got your speed, your power, your heart rate, and we can throw all of that into sort of a bioinformatics package and work out where people are at without needing to do a VO2 max. We can see changes. This is how, products like, some of the Strava metrics and some of the, all of them, Garmin, Training Peaks, they'll have this where you're at in terms of your preparedness for racing. And a lot of that comes down to the interaction between heart rate, speed, and how those things are changing. One of the things when we do VO2s is if someone suddenly gets faster, their heart rate should change immediately. And if there's a lag, then it suggests that they're not really fresh. So some of those little micrometrics we can now pick up a bit sort of using AI, throwing all the data in. So I think that some of those older things like, not older because they've still got relevance, but VO2s, not everyone needs to go in all the time and be tested in a lab. Where does the heart function sort of sit in amongst that? I mean, it is interesting. I think we haven't so much, we're really only coming at that sort of more recently, realising that we can somewhat pick the super athletes. And if we looked at young people, maybe you're right. Maybe there would be a degree to which we could say, I think this is always going to be a challenge for you, or this person's got super talent.
Because, and this, you can make that direct link with, okay, I've just said large heart, but I think it was better what you said, heart function, because it's not only about the size of the heart, it's the way it functions, the way you said it can pump that amount of, volume in and out in that short time. And the question I guess I was thinking about is, we see guys at the very top end. Let's use the three guys we're talking about at the moment, Remco Evenepoel, Tadej Pogacar, and Jonas Vingegaard. These guys, they've essentially, without knowing anything, let's just say they're all got very similar size hearts and the function is very similar. Yet it comes down to Remco, put him in, if it's just down to that, technically, Tadej Pogacar should be able to win everything. But we see Remco, which he more or less does, Remco, put him on a time trial bike and he's in his own class. So it comes down to, you don't just look for the best time trialers with the best data. There is still a small percent, which I do like, of racecraft or race efficiency that still is going to come back into it. And I try and rewind back to when I was racing and say that, yes, the racecraft was a big element of it. I feel like it's less now, but is it? Is it not? Because we're all at the same, just say they're all at the same level in terms of to enter the peloton. So there has to be some kind of differentiating factor.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing in this is the racecraft within a race. The other thing that I think Pogacar in particular has redefined is the ability to back up. Because in the past, if if someone did won the Tour de France, they were out for a couple of months, or they were, if you'd have people who would race, say, Flanders and Roubaix, but then not the later sort of one-day classics, or vice versa. Whereas it seems that some of the Pogacars of the world can almost front up to every one of them in prime form. That I find that absolutely remarkable, because one of the things we do see with heart function in elite athletes is that if you go hard for long enough, the heart looks tired. Unless you've got an ultrasound or the tools we have, you can't see that. You might be able to a little bit in some of your heart rate metrics, but it's a bit of a silent thing. You can feel when your legs are sore or tired. It's harder with your heart, but we see when the heart's tired. So it never surprised me that people, if they did the Giro, for example, couldn't get up for the Tour or these sort of things, whereas Pogacar's resetting that a bit as well.
Well, what do you think has changed there? Because, I can definitely attest to what you're saying. We saw the heart rates drop in the end of a Grand Tour, and you couldn't, your peak power wouldn't match your heart rate towards the third week of a Grand Tour. You were limited to what you could do. So my theory may be is that, these guys are training less, but more efficiently, harder, shorter, not doing the massive volumes that, say, I did or generations before me. I heard about 40 to 50-hour weeks of this slow sort of training where they were building up this big endurance. And maybe was that just making the heart tireder? And these guys are just compacting their training to much more efficient. When Pogacar speaks about doing, 300 watts for an extended period of time, he's able to do that. He's more efficient at that higher wattage.
Yeah, maybe it is. I mean, the variables you would think about would be sort of training, nutrition, perhaps other training sort of, supplements that help people recover, or whatever. Whether in the past people have had, different training tents, for hypoxic training or even superoxic training or whatever. So I guess I don't know the sort of training world, but I think getting smarter with training would be a big lever to work with. And then nutrition. I mean, nutrition's interesting because there's as many rumours that go around as fact. For a while, I think a lot of the performance was being attributed to ketones as a sort of energy supplement. I'm not sure now with the passage of time that that's so true, but certainly they've probably got better sort of nutrition. There's a bit of a trend to get more calories in during racing. So some of those things probably make a difference both to performance and to recovery. But it's hard to say because the performances are, out of the box.
I want to come back to, without speculating too much about the training and stuff but just your more area of expertise and how he's able to, many of the riders are able to back up for multiple races, which we didn't see in the past. And an area that you've done a lot of your study in is, AFib, atrial fibrillation, where, and you'll have to correct me when I'm wrong here, but, from what I understand is this sort of training, this sort of training where the riders or the athletes running or triathlons were doing training that was always stressing the heart, but not crazily, not maximal effort, sub-maximal, but for long, long periods of time. So I guess that's what my thought was when it came back to the training, that they're doing shorter but more intensive, more effective training. Is that way able to maybe not stressing the heart in such a way, or you are predicting to see tired hearts coming?
Yeah, I mean, again, I've got to be careful because I'm not a coach and I don't have all of that. But what I would say is that when we look at the heart and when we look at it when it exercises, the heart can deal really well with low intensity sort of exercise and can do it for a long period of time. So it's sort of, those lowest L1, L2 sort of training tolerates really well. Then perhaps surprisingly, it also tolerates really hard, short exercise. The thing that puts the most stress on the heart is that sort of time trial, that perhaps around the 300 watt sort of range where it's hard but can be sustained, somewhere around what we'd call ventilatory threshold, that sort of peak sustainable kind of effort. That's when the heart is sort of maximally stretched, full, and still working really hard. The reason why really high intensity exercise is more manageable is because the heart can't manage to do it for long. It has to recover. So whereas that sort of mid zone, and I do get the impression from what I hear that smarter training seems to involve people doing more, 90% or 95% of the work in the low zones, and then 5-10% in the really high zones, and saving that middle zones for racing. There's no point going out and doing a race on Wednesday in training because it's in some ways taking away from the efforts that you. So it's almost like you train at both extremes to hit the middle zone in a race. And there's a lot of sports that have adapted. I mean, historically, Peter van Hoogenband in swimming was one of the first to do this, where he swam 400 metres, which requires you to be going really hard for quite a few minutes. But he would train by swimming either really slow or really fast for really short periods of time. So he actually avoided the very thing that he was racing at largely in training. And I think that there's a lot of sort of sense in that if you want to be racing well for longer.
When it comes to a tired heart or athletes that you're seeing with the symptoms of AFib and things like this, is it generally these athletes that are performing these long endurance sports? Like let's look at an 800 meter runner. Very, very hard effort for 2 laps of a track. What's an 800 meter time? Don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, 140.
140
like
there,
that.
and 1 minute 40. Which ultimately I can imagine yourself feels like you're doing more damage than good because your heart feels like it's going to pull out of your chest.
Yep.
Whereas you go and do an ultra, 100k ultra, and you're out there all day and you feel like you could do it all day.
Yep.
I guess, tell me what you've learned about the heart in the different disciplines of, the sports.
Yeah, so when we see this, if you like, side effects of endurance exercise, the atrial fibrillation and maybe even, some of the more serious heart rhythm problems, the ventricular tachycardia, and people will be aware of some athletes with defibs because the heart rhythm is really bad. Just to make a quick point, but atrial fibrillation is the most common heart rhythm problem. It's very safe. It doesn't cause people to die suddenly, but it can be a real nuisance, and it is associated with things like stroke, especially in older athletes. So it's not, you don't want to have atrial fibrillation, but it's not at the same time an absolute disaster. Because it's the most common, we've got the best information on that. And it seems that atrial fibrillation is most common in the athletes that do that high intensity, long sort of stuff. So rowers, cyclists, triathletes, these sports that demand both in training and racing a lot of the time to be high intensity but sustained. Whereas interestingly, you said 800, good example, 800 meter runners, short runners, we don't seem to see those atrial fibrillation problems because training involves really, full rivet, but quite short with good amounts of recovery. And it really doesn't require the same sort of, sustained work and after a short race, no matter how hard it is, we just see the heart working really well afterwards. Whereas, one of the most profound examples I can think of is one of the athletes who did a 24-hour world record attempt, and at the end, cycling, rode just under 900 kilometres. I can probably mention, he won't mind, but Mitch Anderson, who's doctor actually, but rode 895 kilometres in 24 hours, averaged 37 kilometres an hour, unbelievable feat. His heart at the end really, really looked fatigued, sick, and it did recover with time, but that's probably the most...
How quickly did you see his heart afterwards? Did you see it under ultrasound or something, or did you just...
immediately after the race, and his heart was in what we'd call in the ranges of heart failure.
Wow.
It really, the function was quite severely reduced. It's the most profound thing I've ever seen in terms of going 24 hours, perfectly good functioning heart, to 24 hours later looking so sick, we would normally have someone like that in hospital.
And would you say, given his fitness and his recovery from that, would you recommend not doing that again to him? Or would you say, wow, that's just how it is, the heart's going to bounce back? Or would you say, well, it's great you got it, but I wouldn't recommend that to anyone?
Well, it's a good example of something where he couldn't have done it for weeks afterwards. Normally if we measure someone, say after an Ironman triathlon, we see the heart function reduced, but within a few days it sort of looks back to within what we can measure as normal. Whereas Mitch's heart took, as in Mitch Anderson, it took about 3 weeks to get back into the ranges that we would call normal, and we've not seen that before. So it just really and similarly, I've just never seen a performance like that. He was really shattered at the end of 24 hours. It sort of seems manageable in your head, but when you see someone cycling around for 24 hours at that sort of effort, it was truly phenomenal. It also speaks to exactly what I was saying before, which is that if he had ridden for 3 weeks across Australia, his heart would have been relatively fine. If he had ridden for 1 hour as hard as he could, his heart would have been fine. It's really that sort of sweet spot of going really hard for a long period of time where the heart it's trying to work when it's starting to fail and then becoming a vicious circle.
Funny that you say that, because one of the training zones I used to do was called sweet spot, and it is sub-threshold but above sort of endurance pace, and they call it that because you can do it for a long period of time. It was in the pre-season, I'd spend 2 times 45-minute efforts. You'd get an hour and a half or 2 hour long efforts or 3 hour effort at sweet spot. And the idea was to build up that 300 watt range. I guess what I'm trying to drive to and build out a bit of a picture is what we can best do, and as everyday Joe blows. And I guess one other thing I wanted to touch on is I'm doing a bit of work with the Lancefield football team, Lancefield Tigers, coming home strong, 8 games to go. Let's go. And look, football in general, Australian football and game sports, hockey or rugby, whatever you want to call soccer, it's explosive. You're going on, off. They're endurance athletes. They've got to run a whole game, 2 hours. And it comes back to that 800 metre. What is best, I guess I'm trying to drive to, because are they still getting the amount of growth that you see with, for instance, me in World Tour cyclists and Olympic rowers and things like that, that longevity of the big heart that you've spoken so positively about? Are you getting that in if you play those game sports? Is that something better suited?
So we don't. I mean, it's really interesting because it just shows how specific the body is to all of its training. And you're right, if you do a 2 hour game of footy, you are going for 2 hours, but it's all stop-start. So the most important thing is how fast you are over about 6 seconds or even 3 seconds, to break the tackle and get away. And then often you get to stop and jog or walk, and whereas that sweet spot, that having to maintain a high level for a long period of time is completely unnecessary for them. And so the body adapts to what it needs. And if we do a VO2 max in those guys, and if we look at their heart size, they are not elite endurance athletes. It's quite a sort of, different training stimulus and different result. Similarly, if you take the endurance athlete and put them on a footy field, they're virtually useless because they don't have that sort of explosiveness, stop-start kind of thing. So it's amazing how specific the body can be.
It's funny that you say that, because training with the boys, they speak about, oh yeah, you could easily do this, you can run our legs off. Funny thing is, I try and keep that that perspective up, but actually they can outrun me, no worries, for a lap or two. It's just that when we need to back the effort up, I'd be like, finally I can come over the top of you in the 15th, 20th effort. But for the first 10, 15, these guys are killing me out there. It's funny because, I guess I'm trying to ask the question, and everyone wants to know this, what's the best thing to do? If I'm out there and I've got a chance to go for a ride or play for the local team, or just go for a short run, or even just whatever it is, a short swim, what is the bang for your buck? Because I'm sort of feeling like if you keep everything in moderation seems like the best thing. Drink in moderation, eat sweets in moderation, watch TV in moderation if it was my kids. whatever it is. So sport in moderation maybe is the best angle. It's not like going out and doing big epic adventures, or it's just 1 or 2 hours a day, or 1 hour a day, 7 hours a week. That'd be the prime. Is that the answer?
Yeah, I think this sounds cliched, but the best exercise is the one that you enjoy to do, because in reality, that's the thing that keeps you going. Like if you enjoy riding the bike, or if you enjoy running, or if you enjoy playing footy or whatever, then that is the best form of exercise, because whatever keeps you going. In terms of healthfulness, what I often say is that beyond, we call it the asymptote of benefit, which means as you go from being a couch potato to being a bit fit, there's huge health benefits. As you go from being a bit fit to moderately fit, then there's further health benefit. Once you go from moderately fit to super fit, the health benefits become pretty modest. So that, I'm not for 1 minute saying, don't get into competitive, cycling or whatever, but it's more for the love of it than for the health benefits. And I've got no problem with that. Like, that's life, isn't it? You do things for the love of it. But the other side of that is that people who train and race really hard and they're really fit almost kind of kid themselves. Perhaps we've oversold the message that they're bulletproof. And some of the mistakes that seem to be coming out, for example, marathon runners for 20 years and then they've got type 2 diabetes, and people that have done all the right things and they have health problems. I think you can't lose sight of the importance of diet, for example, when you're doing everything else, or looking after your blood pressure. Don't think I'm so fit I don't need to worry about the bag of snakes that I have for lunch or whatever, because we really have now realised that there is a bit of all things in moderation: diet, exercise, everything for health.
Well, I'm really glad you said that, because it's something that I am running into at the moment. Just recently done some bloods, understanding that my liver function isn't great, because I have been treating myself not great. I've been living exactly what you said. I'm bulletproof. If I go out, do my exercise, I'm okay. I can have a few beers, earn my beer, I used to say, or haven't been respecting my diet, seeing that blood glucose come up again. It's just, look, I'm not in serious trouble, I don't think, but it's a wake-up call, and I think that was the message that got drummed home to me, is that, hey, great, you've had your bit of a rest period from being an athlete. It's time to get back on the wagon. It's time to treat yourself well, because I was trying to do everything I used to do, but I wasn't fueling my body correctly. So the body ultimately was burning the candle at both ends, and the blood work showed that. The mind wasn't telling me. I was just push through. That's the mentality as well, and I think maybe it's something that the endurance, the long endurance athletes have, is that this theory of, if I'm feeling bad, I've just got to push harder. And listening to your body, you just can't underestimate that, can you?
Yeah, I think you're right. And saying the athlete of old was the cliche, bowl of pasta every night with a bit of tomato paste on it or something, and finish the ride and have 3 coffee scrolls. And it was all about kind of refined carbs. And I think we're learning that there's a bit more complexity to it, and having a good balanced diet is critical as well, and sleep and all of those. The well-rounded athlete is probably the one of the really important messages. And for the middle-aged athlete, it also is, like you've just said, to get in and be checked, and don't assume that the years of training hard has created a sort of an insurance policy, because none of us have got one of those.
Andre, as always, an absolute privilege to talk to you, to have this testing done. When am I booked in again?
5 years would be the next
no.
testing point. But we can see what we can do.
The drop-off's going to be horrendous. I am not looking forward to that VO2 max. Lovely speaking to you. Thank you very much for all your time, Dr. Andre Gerche.
Pleasure. Thanks, Mitch.
Well, has that got you geared up for the Tour de France? A little insight to what is maybe under the hood of those guys racing over there at the Tour de France. I do feel very privileged to be able to get that testing done with Andre, although at the time you don't necessarily love it, but I always love going through the results with him. A big thanks goes out to our partners in this episode, Shocks, Saley, and of course, our major partner, MAP. As well as Red Bricks, who string this episode together, and of course, my Life in the Peloton team, Spurlo, Tim, Eleanor, Will, Phil, and Ollie. Couldn't do it without you guys. The Dirty Docker is coming, so don't miss out. Get on board now and make sure to pack your tent so you do not miss out on all the fun and games at the Fiesta Village Saturday night. Until next time, guys, enjoy the Tour de France. We have lots coming to you this July. Podcasts, the race radio, the race communique, the bikes and beer ride here in Melbourne with our friends from Bridge Road Brewers, and our special limited Tour de France evening at the Frederick Bar and Bistro here in Cremorne in Melbourne. Lots going on. I can't wait to do it with you all. So guys, until then, cheers. That iconic music in this episode was composed by none other than the legend Pete Shelley. Cheers, mate.